So, Imelda is going to speak to us about gods of portals, life transitions, and liminal spaces. I give you Imelda Almqvist.
Thank you. Just running a sound check. Can you hear me with the microphone on? Yes. All loud and clear? Yeah. Okay. Well, big thank you to the Gatekeeper Trust for inviting me to be here. I feel very much honored. I'm going to be speaking to you today about the great beings that come forward, that mark portals and gateways and thresholds in the land, in individual work with people, in ceremonial work with students, with people on the land. So I'm going to visit that issue in all these different contexts. And I know that Peter has already talked about that this morning. He spoke beautifully of the figure of the guardian, the gatekeeper. So I was just wondering how many people walked into this building here this morning and actually walked through the door, the two doors you come through, and tuned into the spirit of this building, the guardian of this building, like who's the gatekeeper of this building? Did people give that a thought when you walked in here this morning? You walked with the spirit. That's beautiful.
Peter Dawkins.
Oh! Well, I think Peter Dawkins is a great gatekeeper in his own right, because he opens the door for us on all of these portals. But yeah, this morning I just did a quick tune in, and the spirits were here. We're very, very friendly. And I was shown that this is a place where people come together, and where things come full circle, and where many groups of people come. And there was this sort of lion-alike being that was sort of holding it all. So that's what I caught this morning when I walked into this building. And the threshold is a very interesting place in many ways, because at the moment it's like 8 minutes to 12, meaning we're soon going to go from morning to afternoon, and just that is a threshold. So we move through these thresholds in time. We move from day to night. The day gives birth to the night, and the night gives birth to the day. So even in time we move through thresholds. But then also we're always on the threshold in a human life between the past and the future. Because what is the past? Is it still there or is it gone? And then of course the past is in our memory. But the past is often a series of stories that we tell ourselves. This is what happened in the past. But the question is, with the same material, with the same building blocks, maybe we could have written a different book. We could have told ourselves a different story. So even the past is not a completely fixed thing. And then we spend a lot of time thinking about the future and worrying about the future and trying to fix the things that are going in the future. But in some way, the future never arrives. When the future arrives, it has become the now. It has become today. And in a way, that's all we ever have. We're always on the threshold. We're always moving from one place to another, in space and in time and in our own life. Then Peter also talked about these guardians we meet. He said that in the landscape and everywhere, buildings, cities, heaven as well, we have these guardians of place, like Marion touched upon that with the pictures of the buildings that she showed. So I'm going to try and operate this PowerPoint now. I just wanted to show a picture to illustrate that. This is a picture I took in a fjord in Norway. We were sailing there. But there are these moments where something reflects in the water, and you just get a glimpse of the spirits of place speaking to each other. Because most of the time they're in subtle form, as Peter said, they're like more on the energy level. We do not perceive them. Maybe we see solid human beings, but they're very much there. They're always around us. They're very, very playful, and they find many, many ways of communicating with us. So I just wanted to try to put a little bit of a face or a shape on them. And here in this picture I sort of see the spirits of place in that fjord in Norway, dancing, communicating, and also coming forward to communicate with us. And then buildings have their guardians. So this is in Norway as well. This is a unicorn, obviously. Now, if there's going to be a big unicorn mounted on a building, I think you can be pretty sure that, to use a shamanic expression, that the power animal of that place is going to be a unicorn. So I just wanted to illustrate that concept a bit. Yeah, and then I'm going to talk about the hinge in a moment. Yeah, and then I was going to talk a bit about how we work with the spirits of place. But Peter, I think you've done it beautifully. You made that beautiful point there about we shouldn't be barging into places. But, you know, the moment we ask for permission, and also we bring offerings, we bring a little gift. Like in shamanism, often we bring, you know, like we bring tobacco, or, you know, singing a song is a beautiful offering. You could leave a strand of your own hair. You could, you know, create a poem in the moment. There are like so many, you know, even when you have nothing with you, you can give of yourself. But it's really important that, like Peter said, when you go to visit somewhere, you knock on the door, you're received as a visitor, and often you bring a gift. When we go out to any place, be it on the land, but the land also including cities and all the places we have here on earth, it's always a good idea to not just take, to not just go to take something, but to give something in return as well. So be in that mindset of offering songs, poetry, maybe keep some offerings in your pocket. Because as Peter says, the moment you do that, your relationship with that place shifts and portals will open. And realms will become accessible to you that may stay closed if you do not enter with the right frame of mind. So that's very much the way we work in shamanism as well, Peter. So, yeah. Another thing I'm going to talk about in this presentation is working with the night sky. Because in shamanism I find that wherever I am in the world, and I teach all over the world, so I get to travel a lot, but like the night sky is always there, looks different depending on the time of day or the time of year, like what constellations are up. I mean, they're always up, but like what we see. And what I've really discovered is that these great portals do not only exist on the earth and in the earth, but they exist in the night sky as well, in the greater sort of universe that surrounds us. And again, when we can learn how to tune ourselves to that and how to connect to that, there are these amazing beings in the night sky that can open portals on mystery and on experience and even on initiation. So I'm going to talk about that in more detail later. So the night sky is going to have a mention as well. But first I wanted to talk about the hinge, because you cannot have a door without a hinge. And I was reading that beautiful book, The White Goddess, by Robert Graves, earlier this year. It's a book that I keep on returning to. It's so full of information, you can never absorb it all. And in that book he talks about Cardia, who is the goddess of the hinge. And her name is related to the Latin word cardo. The Latin word cardo means hinge. And first you think, well, a hinge, you know, it's kind of an unprepossessing object, isn't it? The goddess of the hinge. But I got really intrigued, so I started doing my own, sort of, in shamanism we say shamanic journeys to her. I started requesting my own encounters with her and meeting her in meditation. And she turned out to be a very, very interesting being. So Cardia is like this goddess of doorways. Well, she's really the goddess of the hinge. And she protects family life because, you know, it's about opening and closing. So that's about deciding what stays out and what is allowed to come in. And the door sort of is on a hinge and swings on that principle of opening and closing. So she protects the family and especially children, supposedly, from, you know, influences crossing the threshold that are not welcome. And Ovid, the great poet Ovid, said that Cardia's power is to open what is shut and to shut what is open, which I think is really beautiful because it suggests that everything is always in this state of flux, that nothing stays the same. So things that are open maybe need to close, or things that have remained closed now maybe need to open, but there is always that movement. The interesting thing about Cardia is that she also rules over what is said to be the celestial hinge at the back of the north wind, which is a bit of a concept that I need to explain. So I'm going to go to the next picture. And now I think now it's that cursor thing, Steve, that I need to work, right? Okay, so let's see. Do you see the cursor? Yeah, okay, great. Is the cursor now? This is very, very tiny. Is the cursor on Polaris now? Hopefully, yeah? Okay, cool. Managed to make that happen. So obviously the world spins on her axis, and the world is always spinning. So there is this kind of world axis. And the star Polaris, I mean, it sort of shifts sometimes because we're also dealing with the precession of the equinoxes, and things are astronomically more complicated than this. But essentially, Polaris is the star that is right above the axis of the Earth. So it marks the point. And like, say, the Inuit who live on top of the world, they see that very, very clearly. Their night sky is different from ours, because they live on top of the world. So for them, the night sky sort of rotates over their head, and there isn't quite as much, setting and rising of star constellations that we have. So depending on where you are in the world, you're going to see a different night sky. But from the mythology and traditions of the North, because of that spinning and that sort of the Earth's axis being aligned with the star Polaris. And by the way, Polaris, if you think of the star constellations Big Bear and Little Bear, Ursa Major and Ursa Minor, so you think of Little Bear as kind of like little pen with a pen handle, then Polaris is the star at the end of the pen handle like that. So that's what it looks like, and that's how you look for these two distinct shapes. That's how you can identify where Polaris is in the night sky. So there is this idea that because of all of this spinning, there is a kind of celestial hinge, and that relates to Cardia, and that there is an axis that runs through the world, like up to Polaris, and also that there will be a great portal there. And then in Norse mythology, it is said that there are two giantesses, and their names are Fenja and Menja. And they're grinding this sort of millstone, and that represents the spinning of the earth. And the giants in Norse mythology are from pre-human times. They're older than the gods. In Norse mythology, you had the giants before you had the gods. So we're talking about very, very primeval forces personified, who are grinding and grinding this millstone, and really that's what keeps the earth spinning. It's not a neutral thing, but are like these forces that have this divine office of doing that spinning. And then that is all sort of related to that great hinge. It all hinges on that great spinning even of the earth. So I think that's kind of interesting how even a goddess from ancient Greece then still relates to, these beings from Norse mythology, and it all comes together. And then there is also, that led to an understanding of the cosmos, at least in Northern Europe, because like in core shamanism, we talk of a tripartite cosmos. We talk of like a lower world, a middle world, and an upper world. And that's very much something that comes from the north, where people see the night sky, because that grinding and that concept of the millstone was seen as that you had a body of water, which is the primordial water or the primordial ocean. And on that you have the millstones. We're working with the medieval concept of a water mill. Then you have that millstone that these giantesses are grinding and spinning. And then there is another sort of millstone on top. And that's like how you sort of, grind the flour. But because this is what people perceived over their heads. What also came in was a cosmology. And that was that idea of these three worlds. And that in that water you had a world serpent like biting its own tail. So it has been said by some that this whole idea we operate, and this is a model quite often used in shamanism, of a cosmos that has a lower world, a middle world, and an upper world, is sort of based on this idea of a great cosmic millstone and not grinding and spinning. So that's another thing I find very interesting, going back to the meanings of words, or going back to like where does an idea come from that's so alive today, that we buy into today. So Cardia then was married, or she was the mistress of the god Janus. And again, Peter gives Janus a mention, saying he is the two-faced god, or sometimes even the three-faced god, the god of doorways, but also the god of the beginning of a new year. That's why January, our month January, is called after him. So he's another interesting one. And I thought I'd have my own encounter with these two calls to just sort of see what their energy was and what they could tell me. And what Cardia told me is that in the mythology around her, there is also a kind of fear about that she needs to protect the house from bad influences, like witches, sort of, entering and getting to the children, which is a very demonic, sort of, fearful idea. So I asked her about that, and then she sort of said, because she is the hinge, and because she is at that point where things are constantly swinging from one opposite into another opposite, an opening and a closing, and that's how the evolving and the rotating occurs, and that's how ultimately the evolution of human consciousness occurs. But she says at the moment you have that divine office, you're also the hinge on which the human journey into darkness turns, because the human journey is from darkness into the light, and from the light into darkness. And that keeps on going as well, because that's how the learning occurs. So she says that, if you are like the great celestial hinge, people are going to worship you, but they're also going to blame you maybe for flipping things into their dark aspects sometimes. So that's how she explained that bit of a reputation she has. And she said, this was in a shamanic journey I did, literally she said that she feels she sometimes becomes the personification of a dreaded outcome, because it's easier to believe in demons sometimes than to accept that it's part of the journey of the human soul to move through darkness, that it actually, it serves the journey of our own soul. So I thought she put that quite beautifully. And then I was talking to her about her marriage to Janus, because they're supposed to be lovers or possibly married. And apparently it was Janus who gave her the hinge as an emblem. So it was a gift from her to him. And then she said, but of course I'm married to Janus, because no door can exist without a hinge. And a hinge means nothing unless there is a door on it. These two things go hand in hand and they operate together. So I journeyed to Janus and asked him if there was anything he wanted to add. And then he said, well, we all seek a partner. We all, so to speak, seek to marry someone who brings movement to the parts of us where we ourselves stand still. Meaning, when that happens, they activate a larger range of potential within us. And I thought, that's a beautiful way of putting it. And then he also said, and if you had a door and hinges about a wall, the door would keep on spinning, and what you would have is a wheel. And I thought, okay. So that's probably enough about Cardia and Janus. Another thing I find very interesting, we have it in shamanism, but it's sort of been borne out by quantum physics recently, is that we are all at the center of the universe. So I've talked about the axis of the earth, but also in shamanism we teach people that, everyone has their own axis mundi. Axis mundi literally means the axis of the world. But in shamanism, we use it as an access point to spirit. If we're going to this upper or lower worlds, we often start with our axis mundi to orientate ourselves in space and time. But really, everyone has one. And wherever you are in the world, there is an axis mundi everywhere. So that's and they say that now in quantum physics as well, that there is no center of the universe. In other words, everywhere is the center of the universe. All of us are the center of the universe. I just think that's lovely, the way discoveries in quantum physics match discoveries, or what we've been taught from shamanism, and that's wisdom that comes from ancient times. And this is something my own spirit allies said to me recently as well. They said, Imelda, you are just one heartbeat in the lifespan of Mother Earth, and all human beings are. That's what we are, one heartbeat in the lifespan of Mother Earth. And I really think that's beautiful. Puts things into perspective. It's also very, very beautiful to be that one heartbeat of Mother Earth. Okay, then I'm going to go on to the next slide. So here, this is a picture of those bears in the night sky. So the little bear and the big bear who are always spinning and rotating, and there's a lot of mythology around that. Now I'm going to move to Spain for a moment. I have a colleague in Spain. Her name is Carmet Evensuur. If you want to Google her work, it's best to Google Earth Speaks, and then all of her work will come up. She runs really amazing courses and trips to Africa. Really fabulous work. So she's a geomancer, and it's through working with her, because we have taught courses together in Andalusia, Spain, where sacred art, my thing, meets geomancy. So it's been like a rock art course where we go into caves and look at rock art and go out on the land with people. So it's been really wonderful working with her, because she's been my teacher when it comes to geomancy. So I've learned a lot from her about what's happening in the land. So what I wanted to get on, I've talked about this marriage between, Janus and Cardia, and how they both need to be there for all potential to be activated. So Carmen and I, a few years ago, were organizing a rock art workshop in Spain, and we're going to have a group of people, and we're talking to the spirits of the land. What is it that needs to occur here? Because close to where she is, there is a lagoon. It's called the Laguna de la Janda, that has been drained, and the water has all been diverted, so the farmers can use it for farming. But it used to be like a really beautiful lagoon before the water was drained, and it's also a major stopover place, because, birds have their migration paths, and as they fly on these migration paths, they have stopping point where they need to drink water and rest, and then they continue. So the Laguna de la Janda was one of these stopping points on the migration paths of birds. And also the bird population was much reduced because there was no water there anymore. So this is also a thing when we start messing with water supplies or damming it up or draining it. It doesn't just affect the human realm, it hugely affects the spirits of place and also the animals and even the migration pathways of birds. It affects the whole, all of life really. So anyway, so we were talking to the spirits of place and asked what needed to be done there. And the guidance we got was that in the past, there used to be this concept of the sacred marriage or the Hieros Gamos, that there was this marriage between, the king had to be married to the goddess, so the king had to be married to the goddess of the land. In that, a kind of marriage between heaven and sky occurred as well. It's like the divine realm was married to the earth realm, and that way, you preserve fertility and vitality and all that. So we were told that the way the farmers were draining and intensively farming the land had really, really depleted the land. So there was a Hieros Gamos that needed to occur. And the thing is also that whatever is held in the land comes out in the lives of human beings. It's not just that the land doesn't look great, but someone told me a story once about the Netherlands, where I'm originally from, and that there is a street of houses somewhere in the north of the Netherlands where there is a real rupture in the land. There is something not right there in the land, something happened there. So on that street, in all of those houses, all the people who move there all end up getting divorced. So it's a very bad place to live. So people have started calling it divorce row, the row of houses. And yet it's sort of interesting. And rather than waking up to the fact we need to do a piece of work on the land to maybe see what's going on there and heal that, people would just move and the next family would move in, and the story would play out again. So just to give a very practical example of what can happen when we lose that connection to the land. And some of that stuff is happening in Spain as well. Some really archaic energies are playing out. And that's getting into the relationships between men and women as well. It's like some really, really difficult energy there. So Carmen and I were told that we had to do a piece of ceremonial work where we brought back the concept of the Hieros Gamos, the sacred marriage. But then, of course, on a real level, you also think how are you going to do that? Because, in the past, that would have been enacted with, the high priest and the high priestess and all that, and we didn't have access to all of these things. So we decided we had to do it with ceremonial objects and really do the work with full attention and sort of enact it. So we had rocks, and we're painting on rocks to set the scene ceremonially. This is one river, the Celemin. There is another one called the Butte. This is a female river, but there's another one nearby, the Butte, which is a masculine river. And it was also about bringing together the water from these two sources of water and pouring that together. So that was done in ceremony. Let's go to the next picture. Yeah, let's see if we can see that. So here it's you have the pathways of the birds. And let's just go here as well. And this is what I was saying, that it's not just us looking at the night sky, but like what we call the Milky Way. It's used by birds when they fly at night. They actually use the stars and they navigate by the stars. So that painting is called Pathway of Birds. And here we have some of the caves we were working in Spain. A particular picture I'm trying to get to. So this rock art, that's like an early calendar in a cave in Spain. And then you have these portals. Like to me this was like an eye. It's like a portal again in a cave overlooking the Atlantic. This was work we did on the beach where all these birds, because we're connecting to the birds in their migration path, so many different species of birds had dropped feathers. So on the beach we had all of these feathers. They became like the keys of a piano. So we're playing the piano and making a piece of music to restore balance to the land. So that's that. Then working with Mother Water as a great spirit, because the land had been depleted and the land was so dry where there used to be water. So these are all like spirits that come forward when we work. But this is the one I'm really wanting to get to. So this is the red ochre woman. So what we did then is like, we worked for 5 days to prepare. So people were really connecting to energies. We made songs. We found rocks and used red ochre to paint on rocks. Also meaning it's a natural material. So when the rains come, it all washes off again. You're not leaving a permanent marker on the land. It's just that it's ceremony. You create the right circumstances for ceremony. And then, of course, it all starts playing out in the group, because the moment you start working with a group of people, looking at how depleted the land is, because the people in that group are going to reflect back to you, what's depleted in their life. So the whole thing almost becomes a bit of a group psychotherapy, where you have to deal with, all of those dynamics, and there were some pretty big eruptions there, because, to be able to heal the land, whatever you're going to heal in the land, you have to heal it within yourself. That's another threshold, your own heart. It's the inside and the outside, and that what is around you reflects what is within you. So you're always walking between these two worlds. So when you do this work with a group of people, interesting things are going to be flying. But in the end, that work was done with ceremonial objects. I didn't have a good picture where you can see the stones that people had painted, and the stones all had symbols from local rock art on it that people had journeyed on and visioned on. And this Hieros Gamos was returned. The idea of the Hieros Gamos, the sacred marriage, the marriage of heaven and earth, of the divine principle to the earth principle, it was returned to the land. And then what occurred, which I can only express in a painting, was that there was this soul flight, that the human beings were giving this gift of, we were like given the wings of these bird species we've been working with, so we were like flying, and flying into other realms, and portals opened, but also the land was really revitalized. So even in the weeks after the work we did, there were more flowers growing there, there were more eagles overhead. Maybe the farmers were a bit friendlier about allowing people access on their lands. There was this whole shift in the land. On all sorts of levels you can see that a powerful piece of work with the right intentions and the right focus was done. And it's really, really wonderful when you see the land awakening. And when the land awakens, there are more portals you can move through. There is always the reciprocity. There's always the return gift. Okay, so here's another picture from Spain. So we did this course, we taught it a few times. So this was the next year we returned, because we made that commitment to the spirits of the land to return and to do more work. And then actually the whole idea of the Hieros Gamos, the sacred marriage, it moved to another level. So the guidance was that it had to be about the marriage of the sun and the moon. And it shifted from the Hieros Gamos that now it was about the birth, that there had to be a divine child that had to be born. The divine child being like the new beginnings, the new paradigm that is coming in, so the new energies that can arrive on earth when the earth and the land have been well prepared. So that's all so the divine child is that offspring of the Hieros Gamos. And that was really beautiful as well, because we're doing a lot of our work. We're going into these caves and deep under the ground, we're looking at rock art. And then there was this guidance that the moon wanted to travel into darkness deep underground, and from that place meet the sun. So we had to do a piece of work where one of us had to merge with the moon, become one with it, take it all the way down, deep, deep into a cave where there was a rock pool that had a hole in the ceiling so you could just see the sun through it. So we sort of brought the moon to the water and the sun reflected through this natural hole in the rock into the cave. And we brought them together, and there was this marriage of the sun and moon. Which probably sounds really, really wacky, but when you're in the middle of that, it's powerful, it's beautiful, it kind of changes your life forever. It's really, really beautiful work. So, so that is the Hieros Gamos. And I think after doing that work in Spain, I've just become a lot more attuned to these principles. I don't quite see the sun and the moon with the same eyes. I follow birds in a different way. I feel more connected to the birds. Like all of these things, they have become like awakened within me. And I'm now attuned to the movements and the sort of interaction of those things that what maybe in a way I was not. And I also very much thank my colleague Carmit for that, so to be part of my awakening in that, being my teacher. So then I'm going to go to another location. I'm now going to flip to New Mexico in the United States. Because about a month, 6 weeks ago, I was in the United States, in New Mexico, and I was with a group of shamanic teacher colleagues at a place called Chaco Canyon, which is a couple of hours from Santa Fe in New Mexico. I think it's to the south. And we're doing a piece of work there, and of course, we had visited the place and asked for permission and started working with the guardians of Chaco Canyon long before we arrived there. And often that's a very good idea as well, not just asking permission when you arrive, but when you're going to be going somewhere, do your meditations and start talking to the guardians of the land long before you even get there, meaning you've already created a really good relationship before you actually arrive on the scene. And then your entry through the portals into the land is going to go much quicker. And also using your own dreams for that is very, very good. So a group of colleagues and I were really dreaming. We're writing a dream diary. We're setting dream intention about what was it. We're going to be doing at Chaco Canyon. And so by the time we arrived there, we had a pretty clear idea of what it was that the spirits over there were asking for. Also not just to go in there and have our own fantasy of we will do that, but it always needs to be in communication with what is there, the spirits of place. What is the land asking for? What's actually needed in that moment? That's going to be different from a month ago or a year from now. It will never be the same thing. So this is an old pueblo from the Anasazi people used to live there in Chaco Canyon a long time ago. And this is what they call a butte in the United States, B-U-T-T-E. I was completely mispronouncing that until someone set me straight. And this butte was the one we were camping. There's a campsite there, and we were camping there very close. So this was our view. This is the one we saw. And it's a very, very interesting one, because it's actually called what is called the Anasazi sun dagger. That's this picture. Where there is like a spiral carved, it's like a natural chamber in the rock, and there is a spiral carved there, and then there's like a crack between the sandstone where the light comes through at certain times of the year, when the sun is aligned a certain way, and that's called the sun dagger. And here in this picture you can see how that works. At the time of the summer solstice, the sun dagger goes right through the heart of the spiral. At the time of the winter solstice, you get two beams of light that frame the spiral, so it looks like the middle picture there. I'm sure you can see it like here. And then at the time of the equinox, the dagger, well, people have called it that, maybe it's not a dagger, it's a beam of light, falls exactly halfway between the center and the edge of the spiral. So that's that's like a local feature of where we were. But then, let's see if I can bring up. Is that a Rob's picture now? Oh yeah, no, not yet. This is the Butte by night, because the whole thing about this Butte is that Chaco Canyon is what is called dark sky territory. So a lot of astronomers go there because there is no light pollution, there are no cities nearby. It's completely undisturbed sky, no natural sources of light. And it's amazing. You can see stars there that I've not been able to see almost from any other place in the world. It's almost like dazzling, because I know my star constellations. I can look at the sky and know what I'm looking at. And I was completely bewildered that first night. It was like there were so many stars. I couldn't see the forest, couldn't see the trees for the forest, literally. And then also what you see here, the campfire. We had a group of 8th graders, so they're about 13 in the US, maybe year 8, year 9 in our school system. And they were there camping as well with their teachers. And my colleagues were a bit like, oh no, we've got these kids next to us. And I sort of thought, we need to turn this around because we're not going to do good work if we're going to be irritated by the kids. So I said to them, these young people had so much youthful energy. They were throwing frisbees and they had these, light sticks, these disco wands and lots going on there. So I said to my colleagues, look at all that young exuberance, like all of that energy. I say, we are so lucky. These young people are going to be a battery for the work we're going to do. So do not be bothered by them, but just really thank them because they were generating the way only really 13-year-olds can do, like a massive amount of energy. And we had all like sort of past age 40, so we're all, slightly less natural energy perhaps. So I said, what a gift. We have these 8th graders. They're going to do a lot of the work for us. And the colleagues really got loud to that. Oh, Imelda, you're right. Yeah, let's do that. So that shifted that whole situation. And then at night, the Milky Way sort of arches. This is the next picture. But from the Butte, you see there, which is a freestanding sort of mesa, sort of mini mountain in the landscape. So this, where are we? This is the Butte. And when nightfall comes and the Milky Way appears, it stretches right from the Butte and then all the way across, and it comes down on the other side, so it goes right overhead. So a friend of mine took a picture of that, which he has given me permission to use. And his name's Rob Rand. He took this picture, and he's a composer, musician in the US. Makes wonderful spiritual music, like wave ball, so well worth checking out his work. So you sort of see that here you have the Butte again, you can hardly see it. The light effects are the 8th graders, by the way, doing their disco wands, etc., etc. But this more, if you just look slightly up, like this is the Milky Way. So here's the Butte, and here's the Milky Way arching overhead. And then the thing is also with these features in the night sky, as I said, they are like roads and pathways, and they're portals all over the place. So again, if you know how you speak to the guardians and the gods of those portals, it's amazing what you can learn. It's amazing, the experiences you can have. So I'd done a lot of journeying before we did that piece of work, and I was told we needed to work with the ancient Egyptian goddess Nut. And Nut is very much a sky goddess. In the ancient Egyptian days, they had like an earth god who was male, and they had a female sky goddess. So it's a bit of the reverse of the way we think of it in Northern Europe today. So Nut was sometimes seen as a personification of the Milky Way. Because if you look at the way the Milky Way stretches across, and you could really see it at Chaco Canyon, you almost can like see her legs like this, because the Milky Way kind of divides there, and then her arms like that. So she is like this over the land. But not only that, there are these star constellations that they are in the Milky Way, and one of them is Cygnus, that is the star constellation, the Swan. And again, the ancient, let's go to the next picture now for a moment. That's this one, that's one of my own paintings. So the star constellation Cygnus, like the ancient Egyptians believed that the star constellation Cygnus, the Swan, it marks an area in the Milky Way where there is like a uterus-shaped hollow, which in my painting appears about here. Sort of, like her legs would be here. So here is her womb. And because there is that natural void, that sort of dark space in the Milky Way, the ancient Egyptians believed, and they saw the Milky Way as Nut, this personification of the mother goddess. So they believed they could actually look up and see that great void, like the womb of God goddess, whatever you want to call that, the divine womb that all human life comes from. You could see that straight overhead by looking into the Milky Way, which was like an astounding idea. And then you have star constellation Cygnus. So you could say Cygnus is like the gatekeeper, the guardian, like the celestial swan, because Cygnus, also sometimes known as the Northern Cross, that star constellation, marks that spot. And the thing with the goddess Nut is that she is both, as with all mother goddesses from anywhere in the world, every mother goddess also has like a devouring or death manifestation. So the mother is the one who gives life, but ultimately reabsorbs that life back within herself. So every mother goddess, even like Aphrodite, has a death manifestation called the dove goddess. But every mother goddess has that, because this is like a fundamental teaching about human existence. So Nut is the great, like all life comes from there. She's the one, she has the great cosmic womb. So the teaching, the mystery teaching is that human souls like come from that womb and then descend to earth. So that's what you see that little baby there sort of, doing, sort of going down, descending on earth. But also then, when our time on earth is up and we return, we make the reverse journey where Nut actually, then we go through her mouth, swallows us again, and so we return to this great mother goddess. So in shamanism, you would say she's the soul conductor, she's the psychopomp as well as the mother goddess. And not just that, but also, she is the swallowing of the sun is swallowed and reappears, and all of the heavenly bodies move through that as well. So there's lots going on in the night sky. And then I was doing a piece of ceremonial work, and we had a couple there who were very much hoping for a baby, and that was the intention they had brought. And I was leading the ceremony, so they had asked me if that could be woven in some way or form. So what we did is on the land, like facing the Butte, and then we had the 8th graders right here doing all the battery work for us. So we made a spirit canoe shape. So we lined all the human beings up in a spirit canoe shape. And I had the couple who wanted to conceive at the front. And, and they were all making their journey where the spirit canoe, we all collected, it sailed up the Butte, powered by those graders. They pushed it up in the sky, and then it went on to the Milky Way, and it sailed over the Milky Way, and then it came back, so it came full circle. And because I was leading the ceremony, like my eyes were not closed, I was running around and drumming. It was freezing cold, like -6 degrees, so really, really cold. So I was drumming and running around, and they all had their eyes closed, and they were humming, so they were doing beautiful work. But this was the intention that had been set, like asking for the blessing of, a baby. And while all of this was going on, at some point I was walking around them, so I wasn't looking at Cygnus and the Milky Way the whole time, I was also looking at the people I had in the group. But at a crucial moment in the ceremony, I happened to look, and Cygnus was very, very bright, and there was a shooting star that fell right through Cygnus to the earth. So you saw this star, and I was the only one to see it because they all had their eyes. I told them about it later, and they cried, but I was the only one to see this. So standing, I nearly stopped drumming with astonishment. I was like, whoa. So the shooting star, and quite slowly, but very, very certainly, exactly followed Cygnus. It didn't go outside. It moved exactly through the whole body of Cygnus. Like the swan was channeling it down, and then it came down, and it touched the Butte, well, it would have been behind it, but it went into the earth. So we sort of closed that ceremony, and you can't make promises, but I really felt there had been a huge blessing there, and personally I'm just like waiting to hear good news now. I thought that was really beautiful. But it was only 6 weeks ago, so I think there won't be any news. It may take a little bit longer before you get a result on that. But like things like that, you can't make that up. You can't make it up. It's like this gift, like this blessing rains down from the skies. So let's see. So let's look at Cygnus for a moment. Also remembering that, like as depending on where in the year we are, the star constellations rotate. So also Cygnus may appear to sort of move and appear at a different angle. But that star constellation, Cygnus, the swan. Then the next day, we're leaving Chaco Canyon. Sorry? Did someone speak? No, okay. I am going to take questions later. Next day, it's time to leave Chaco Canyon. I was in the car with a colleague. And we're just chatting about how beautiful it had been. And then we're driving. And this cloud appeared. And I said, Richard, look, Cygnus is just, it's almost like we're just talking about the beauty of the work we had done. I said, Richard, look, there's Cygnus in cloud form. And he nearly lost control over the wheel of the car. He was like, whoa, Imelda. And it's like, again, you can't make that up. So this is like driving out of Chaco Canyon. And also Cygnus is like pointing down. It's sort of, it's incarnation coming to earth. So I thought that was just amazing. And then at night, we're in our tents, we're camping, and all these coyotes sort of walking around the campsite and howling. So these days I find it hard to sleep if I don't hear the music of the coyotes. I'm having difficulties coming back from London. And also it's a place where there's beautiful rock art as well. So there's wonderful rock art in that part of the world. So that was Chaco Canyon. Okay. The last thing I want to talk about, so, I've talked about, groups working with the land, where the focus is on shifting something in the land. Then I've talked about Chaco Canyon, where you work in close partnership with these amazing gods and beings and spirits. But there can also be a personal focus for that. You can ask for, healing for a particular situation. Now I want to talk about initiation and personal rites of passage, beings that come forward when you do that. So we're going to go to this one. I'm going to talk about Inanna. And this was exactly last week in London. I have a 2-year art program for students. So the students on my 2-year art program, it's a sacred art practitioner training, so they're becoming practitioners of sacred art. We were enacting the descent of Inanna. And Inanna is the ancient Sumerian goddess who undertakes that journey to the great below. She lends her ear to the great below, and she receives guidance that she is to undertake that journey and to visit her sister Ereskikal, who is the queen of the underworld, of the Kur, of the great below. She is to visit her sister because Ereskikal's husband, the bull of heaven, has just died. Now the bull of heaven is Taurus. That's again a story from the night sky. And that whole story of the death of Taurus and what goes on there, that's at the heart of the Mithraic mystery. So if you're interested in that, look for information on the Mithraic. They're called Mithras in the Mithraic mystery school. It's too much for now. Can't go into all that. But here we have him, this is on my altar in our living room. Is Gugulanna, the bull of heaven, who I brought home from New Mexico. He actually comes from Santa Fe, where he lives with us now. And he takes the role of the great bull when we do ceremonial work like that. So anyway, so here, in the story of Inanna then, so Inanna essentially embarks on the great initiation journey to the land of the dead. Now, normally speaking, what happens when we visit the land of the dead? We don't normally return. When we visit what's also called in the text the dark city, she who returns to the dark city will not return. So it's quite a dangerous undertaking. It's also one of the classical journeys of the shaman. It's the walking between the worlds. It's the walking between life and death. It's what a shaman or a shaman practitioner does. So, as Inanna embarks on that journey, she has to pass through 7 gates. Now there is a gatekeeper who answers the door to the great below. His name is Neti, and that means nothing in Sanskrit. So I think that's very interesting as well, a gatekeeper whose name is nothing. So that's another thing you can really dwell on, what that might mean. So Inanna embarks on that journey, and we enacted it. So we had people, in all of the roles, we made the props, we made the costumes, we really spent time on it. And this is not theatre in the theatrical sense, but this is shamanic theatre in the ceremonial sense. So Inanna makes that journey, and for every gate she comes to, she's only allowed to enter if she leaves something behind. So essentially, Inanna keeps on stripping off. She has she has a crown, the sikura, she has a breastplate, she has a rod, she has all sorts of things. She has a necklace. These things also, some people said, represent both the chakras and the 7 planets that were seen with the visible eye in the night sky at the time the story was written down. So all of these correspondences are in effect. So by the time she appears before Ereskikal, her sister, she's completely naked. Everything has been taken away from there. And then actually she hangs on a meat hook in the great below for 3 days. What we discovered enacting that, and though the script sounds or the language is quite archaic and sometimes a bit hard to get into, but when you work with it for a time, you get into it. It was actually very, very beautiful because all women in my group, there were no men on this occasion, and all of these women were all working through something in their life. They all had a need for a rite of passage. They were all at different ages, different stages in their life. But what I loved about it, that it was so universal, because when you do this work, the gatekeepers and the gods and the goddesses, they meet you where you are. And we made it very individualized as well, so we did many rounds. But that everyone got to work through was like a rite of passage or like an initiation journey they personally had to make, either to maybe gain an insight or also to leave something behind. In most cases it is both. And the extraordinary thing was how the work really met all of these women, even me as a teacher. I always learn something, even I'm in the teaching role and I don't do the descent. I come away a changed person every time. And that was like really, really amazing. And working with all of these beings, Nettie the Gatekeeper, the figure of Ireskikal, the shadow sister, the sister who rules the darkness. Then, of course, there's Gugulanna, the Bull of Heaven, who doesn't have a lot of text, but he's very, very present. And then you get into things like that whole interplay between the divine feminine and the divine masculine. And, there's a lot of, even the subject of sacred sexuality really came up and had to be addressed in our group. So that was looming large as well. And it's really beautiful. When you work with this ancient text, it becomes alive. And essentially, it offers everyone a symbolic journey they can make that really heals and resolves something in their life, where they are right now. And I just think, that's the most beautiful world in the work. And work in the world, sorry, to be doing that. So that was Inanna. So essentially then what happens is a great dismemberment. So this is a dismemberment picture. The text is from the Bible, where, Samson had actually killed a lion. And he turned aside to look at the lion's carcass. And in it he saw a swarm of bees and some honey. There's always that, death feeds life. And ultimately, life also feeds death. All life must ultimately die to give birth to something new. It's that whole cycle that plays out. So, coming to the end of this talk, I just also wanted to throw into the mix the concept of a labyrinth, because when you do a lot of this work, you discover that all of us, when we're born as a baby, we saw a baby in the picture with Nut, and that baby had this sort of rainbow umbilical cord. But, that umbilical cord gets cut at birth. But we all have an umbilical cord to spirit. We all have that personal connection to spirit. I mean, we all even if, we're not aware of that, we still have it. We may choose not to work with that, but we have it. But some people then say that that's what a labyrinth is. It's a representation of that cord to spirit, which is also a journey through life unfolding in space and time, sort of laid out like a spiral, so we can walk it. So for that reason, we have a labyrinth in our garden, and I bring labyrinths into my work with students. So I just wanted to close with that concept. So here we have a labyrinth near Lindbacke labyrinth in Sweden, and here's another one on the island of Blåa Jungfrun, which is in the Baltic Sea. A classic meeting place for witches, is where witches fly on their broomsticks and have their witches' Sabbath. So go there at night sometimes, you'll see some interesting things. Yeah, and then the labyrinth, it always like portals open, it becomes a personal mystery journey. Portals open, and once the portal opens, another journey starts. So that painting depicts a scene from the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is another major initiation story from Sumeria. Gilgamesh was the brother of Inanna, by the way. Another wonderful story, I don't have time to go into it. And then ultimately what we do in shamanism and in my line of work, we don't think in terms as like, good and bad. We don't want to work with polarization because that creates division. But we see things as being in balance and not in balance. And when things are imbalanced, we try to sort of flip the seesaw so they come into balance. And I personally find that a really good way of working. I'm like moving away from all of these ideas about, good or evil or whatever, to just say, this is what is. This is the modeling clay. How can we arrive at balance here? And then I think there's a last picture. Well, that's a painting I once made many years ago. And someone I met in a shamanic journey who told me he was the guardian of unlived lives. For every choice we make, there is a choice we do not make. For every path we take, there's a path we do not take. So we're also, as well as living with a wonderful wealth of experiences, we're all of us living with all the choices we didn't make, and the journeys we didn't make, and the paths we didn't travel. And it's beautiful to think that there is a gatekeeper, a sacred guardian even for that. And that's what he looked like when I met him. And we can visit him in meditations and journeys. And sometimes he's willing to show us some of that. So we can have some learning even from seeing, like what we did not choose, but what might have unfolded. And how that too is part of us. So I'm going to leave it there for today.